गुरवे नमः। मनोभीष्टं स्थापितं येन भूतले स्वयं रूप कदा मह्यं ददाति स्वपदान्तिकं। वन्देऽहं श्रीगुरो श्रीयुतपदकमलं श्रीगुरुन् वैष्णवांश्च श्रीरूपं साग्रजातं सहगण रघुनाथान्वितं तां सजीवं साद्वैतं सावधूतं परिजनसहितं कृष्णचैतन्यदेवं श्रीराधाकृष्णपादा सहगण ललिता श्रीविशाखान्वितांश्च। हे कृष्ण करुणा सिंधु दीनबंधो जगतपते गोपेश गोपिका कांता राधा कांता नमोस्तुते। तप्त कांचन गौरांगी राधे वृंदावनेश्वरी वृषभानुसुते देवी प्रणमामि हरिप्रिये। वाञ्छा कल्पतरुभ्यश्च कृपा सिन्धुभ्य एव च पतितानां पावनेभ्यो वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री अद्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासादि गौर भक्तवृंद। हरे कृष्णा कृष्ण कृष्णा हरे 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 राम 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 हरे हरे। थैंक यू माता जी, थैंक यू प्रभु। हरे कृष्णा।
Hare Krishna. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for doing the Mangalacharan. Hare Krishna. Govindam, Prabhuji, how would you like us to continue? Would you like us to read the text, translation or purport, or shall we hand over to you?
Yeah, if we can read, if devotees can read the Sanskrit translation and purport of both verses, I think that'd be.
Do we have any volunteers, or should I start?
You can start, Mataji. Next, maybe next verse I can do it.
Okay. Hare Krishna. So we are reading the Srimad Bhagavatam. We are on Canto 1, Chapter 13. Chapter 13 is Dhritarashtra quits home. And the text for today is text 44 and 45. Text 44. Yan manasya dhruvam lokam adhuravam vaglana kopayam sarvata nahi shoshyate snehad ayan mohajata. Word to word. Yat, even though. Manyase, you think. Dhruvam, absolute truth. Lokam, persons. Adhruvam, non-reality. Va, either. Na, or not. Cha, also. Ubhyaham, or bothwise. Sarvatha, in all circumstances. Na, never. He, certainly. Sochya, subject of lamentation. They, Snehat, due to affection. Anyartha, or otherwise. Mohaja, due to bewilderment. Translation and purport by Srila Prabhupada. Srila Prabhupada ki Jai. O King, in all circumstances, whether you consider the soul to be an eternal principle or the material body to be perishable, or everything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth, or everything to be inexplicable combination of matter and spirit, feelings of separation are due only to illusionary affection and nothing more. Purport. The actual fact is that every living being is an individual part and parcel of the Supreme Being, and his constitutional position is subordinate cooperative service. Either in his conditional material existence or in his liberated position of full knowledge and eternity, the living entity is eternally under the control of the Supreme Lord. But those who are not conversant with the factual knowledge put forward many speculative propositions about the real position of the living entity. It is admitted, however, by all schools of philosophy that the living being is eternal, and that the covering body of the five material elements is perishable and temporary. The eternal living entity transmigrates from one material body to another by the law of karma, and material bodies are perishable by their fundamental structures. Therefore, there is nothing to be lamented in the case of souls being transferred into another body, or the material body perishing at certain stage. There are others who believe in the merging of the spirit soul in the Supreme Spirit when it is uncovered by the material engagement. And there are others also who do not believe in the existence of the spirit or soul, but believe in tangible matter. In our daily experience, we find so many transformations of matter from one form to another, but we do not lament such changeable features. In either of the above cases, the force of divine energy is uncheckable. No one has any hand in it, and thus there is no cause of grief. Hare Krishna. Text 45.
Hare Krishna Mataji. Yeah, can I read?
Yes, Raj.
Okay. Text 45. Tasma jahi anga vaiklavyam ajnana kritam atmana katam tva ananta kripana varteramstera cha mam vina. Tasmat, therefore, jahi, give up, anga, O king, vaiklavyam, mental disparity, agnana, ignorance, kritam, due to, atmana, of yourself, khatam, how, tu, but, anatha, helpless, kripana, poor creatures, vartaren, be able to survive, te, they, cha, also, mam, me, vina, without. Translation and purport by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada ki jai. Therefore, give up your anxiety due to ignorance of the self. You are now thinking of how they who are helpless, poor creatures will exist without you. Purport. When we think of our kith and kin as being helpless and dependent on us, it is all due to ignorance. Every living being is allowed all protection by the order of the Supreme Lord in terms of each one's acquired position in the world. The Lord is known as Bhutabrut, one who gives protection to all living beings. One should discharge his duties only, for no one but the Supreme Lord can give protection to anyone else. This is explained more clearly in the following verse. Hare Krishna. Thank you, Mataji. Thank you, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, Prabhuji, we hand over to you. Thank you very much, Arya Govind Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
Thank you. Thank you, Mataji. Thank you, devotees, for allowing me the opportunity to speak. I will start off by saying that this first verse that we have is a very technical verse. I have zero realization of it, of both these verses actually, but I'll do my best to try and just repeat what the acharyas, what the senior devotees have shared, and hopefully all of us can be purified, can become enlightened in these technical and also very philosophically deep verses. So let's understand what's happened so far in the chapter, right? So first thing is that Vidura has come back to Hastinapur from his pilgrimage. And during his pilgrimage, what was he doing? He was inquiring about transcendental knowledge, right? He was speaking very much with Maitreya Rishi. And because Vidura was a very cherished personality, when he came back to Hastinapur, all the palace, all the Vasis in the palace, every resident was keen to come see him, speak to him, serve him, offer him prasadam, give him some resting place and so many things. And once all that settled down, then Yudhishthira Maharaj was eager to inquire from Vidura. Where did he go? How did he maintain himself? What services did he get up to? And specifically, Yudhishthira Maharaj was keen to understand how Vidura's pilgrimage was related to Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, and Dwarka. Right? He really wanted to understand what the Supreme Personality of Godhead was up to, basically in one way. And we see Vidura is very compassionate, he's very kind-hearted, so he's sharing all these things, but he doesn't share one thing, and that is the annihilation of the Yadutha dynasty. And it's described that he didn't do that because he had a lot of compassion here, had a lot of affection for the Pandavas, because he knew that if he had shared this information with them, the Pandavas would have just gone in distress because of their own affection for the Lord. And then we see that Vidura decides to stay in the palace for some time, not because he finds it comfortable or because he's interested in the sense gratification of living in an opulent palace, but because he wanted to enlighten his brother Dhritarashtra. And during that enlightenment, he starts off by talking about this time factor, how time destroys all, right? All the attachments that we have for family affairs, how everything gets taken away by the time factor, whether it's wealth, whether it's honor, family, home, even our own lives get taken away by the time factor. And specifically on that point of taking away life, Vidura emphasizes and reminds Dhritarashtra, like, look what happened. Your own father, your brother Pandu, your well-wishers, your 100 sons, they all had to leave their body. And Dhritarashtra, you yourself, you're old, your body has so many defects, it's so close to the expiry date, quote unquote, of the body itself, but still you're choosing to stay in this house. That too, it's not just a normal house. It's the house of those personalities of your own nephews who you tried to destroy, who you tried to kill, who you tried to cause insult, right? All these things Dhritarashtra did to them, and he was happily trying to stay in that palace out of his own sense of gratification, his own envy, his own jealousy, his own pride, his own desire to be king. And Vidura explained that actually a first-class man doesn't prefer to leave their body in this way. A first-class man is sober, they're undisturbed, and actually they'd prefer to go into a remote place to leave their body, purely depending on the Lord. And in this way, Vidura was convincing Dhritarashtra actually. And then we see that Dhritarashtra, Gandhari, who's his wife, and also Vidura, all three of them leave to go to the Himalayan mountains, but specifically without telling anyone. Now, naturally, if they were convinced, okay, we want to leave, we want to go and we want to live peacefully in the mountains until we pass away. If they had told the family members, if they had told the Pandavas, what would have happened? The Pandavas would have tried to convince them, please don't go, just stay with us. And for one reason or another, they might have stayed, whether it's their soft-heartedness or their own desires to stay. So then they've left, and now Yudhishthira Maharaj is searching all over the palace for them. Like, oh, where are they? And they come to Sanjay. Sanjay is the charioteer or the advisor of Dhritarashtra. And they're asking Sanjay, oh, do you know where they've gone? And Sanjay, he himself is lamenting, like, oh, they cheated me also. They didn't even tell me where they were going. Right? And at that point, Narada Muni comes and he starts to explain that the Supreme Lord's will is what brings two people together and separates them. And as part of that initial conversation, Narada Muni now shares this very technical verse, right? Verse 44. I'll read the translation again. O king, in all circumstances, whether you consider the soul to be an eternal principle, or the material body to be perishable, or everything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth, or everything to be an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit, feelings of separation are due only to illusory affection and nothing more. So here Narada Muni is sharing 4 very technical philosophies. Yeah, so we try to take them in turn and try and understand, like break them down with the help of the senior devotees. So the first one we have is consider the soul to be an eternal principle, right? And we know that understanding that we're not this body, we're a spirit soul is one of the foundational principles of spiritual life, of cultivating spiritual knowledge. In the Bhagavad Gita, we know that there's a verse that says, Na jayate mriyate vakadachin nayam bhutva bhavita vanabhuya ajo nitya shashvatoyam puranu na hanyate hanyamane sharire. Right, translation is, for the soul there is neither birth nor death at any time. He has not come into being, he does not come into being, and he will not come into being. He is unborn, eternal, ever-existing, and primeval. And then the last part is he is not slain when the body is slain. So this idea of being an eternal being is there in the Bhagavad Gita. And you could in some ways say that it's only the body that is born, right? If we're eternal, then when we say that somebody's born, it's really the body that came into being. But actually, we understand that the body undergoes 6 types of changes. First, it's birth, then it grows, then it stays around for some time, then it produces byproducts, children, and so many things. And then it dwindles, it gets old, and then it eventually dies. But this happens to the body because it's material, right? These transformations happen because it's material. And we can think or look around us with any material product that we have, right? Like if we look at the laptop or something like the phone, right? How does the phone come into being? Well, the phone in its original raw form was just materials in the earth, right? Raw materials. Then somebody dug it out, then it underwent some processing, then it got manufactured into the mobile phone, and we use it in that manufactured, that processed form, right? We use it in the form of a product that's useful to us. But the thing is, when the phone dies, say, like maybe it's broken beyond repair, we don't become bewildered or lament over it, right? We won't think twice about discarding the phone and getting a new one. We might cry about the data or the pictures that we've lost, you know, the videos we've lost. But even nowadays, we probably won't do that because it's all there in the cloud. You just get a new phone, log in with your same account details, and you're sorted. In the same way that the phone goes through that cycle, our body goes through that cycle because both are material. So what this first school of philosophy is really trying to teach and forms the basis of is that we're an eternal soul, and therefore, dehanosmin yatha dehe komaram yuvanam jara yatha dehantara praptidhirastatra namyati. Right? Just as the embodied soul continuously passes in this body from boyhood to youth to old age, the soul also passes into another body at death. And specifically, a sober person is not bewildered by such a change. So this philosophy is really trying to establish the fact that we're an eternal soul and we're not this body. So we can separate the two and understand that even when this body goes away, we'll still continue on, right? So there's nothing to lament over that. And actually, there's a very famous story with a Greek philosopher, Socrates, right? Socrates, which I don't know how many on this call know, but yeah, he's a very well-known Greek philosopher. And I can't remember the reason why he was imprisoned, actually, but he was imprisoned and he went through the court justice system, so-called, and he was sentenced to death. But whilst he was in prison, he actually developed a very nice relationship with some of the guards, some of the prison guards. And back in those days, the way death was administered is through poison. So the guard would come, give poison to the prisoner who was sentenced, and when they're ready, they'd take the poison themselves. With this specific guard who Socrates had a very good relationship with, he was the one that was told, okay, give Socrates the poison. And he was really like upset about it because he had a really good relationship. But so he came, gave the poison and told Socrates that, look, you know, you don't have to take it now. You know, most prisoners, they take it at night just before they're going to sleep. So then, you know, it's nice, like, you know, you don't have to think too much. There's nothing like out of the ordinary for a lot of them. But he was like, you know, just give it to me. You know, it's fine. Like, just give it to me. And so the guard was then asking, okay, you've told me about your family, your children. Is there anything you want us to do for them? And Socrates was like, if they live a good life, if they look after themselves, then good things will come. It's fine. So then God is like, okay, well, how do you want to be buried? And Socrates replies, well, you can do what you want. First, you have to catch me in order to bury me. Right? And the god's confused. So Socrates then explains that, look, you know, once I take this poison, I'll leave my body. you're not going to catch me. What you're going to do with the body has nothing to do with me anymore. So you can do whatever you want with the body, but if you want to bury me, you're going to have to try and catch me first. Right? So this understanding from even Greek philosophers or who actually start the Western philosophy, this understanding is there, that there's an internal principle which is the soul. So then we flick the switch to modern sort of philosophy, which is the second one. The material body to be perishable. Right? So this is the second one Narada Muni mentions. And this is actually quite an atheistic or materialistic philosophy, which basically says that we're nothing more than the material body, right? And that material body could be the gross and the subtle body, right? So the mind, intelligence, and the physical body. And one philosopher that really comes to mind here is Charvaka. Charvaka's philosophy was that any knowledge that we acquire can only be acquired through these senses that we have, right? Through the eyes, the tongue, the nose, etc. Right? If we can't acquire knowledge through them, then it doesn't exist, right? So he's basically saying that if the senses can't perceive or understand something, then that something doesn't exist. And when we look at materialists, we can see that actually, knowingly or unknowingly, this is the type of philosophy that they practice, right? They use this philosophy to justify, to act out their sense gratification, their desires, basically. Basically use this in the sense that, okay, all we are is this body. There's no idea of an afterlife. There's no idea of reincarnation. There's no idea of judgment day. There's no idea of a spiritual world. There's nothing like that. All it is just this one life, right? So why not enjoy this one life, right? We have to die. We only live once, so just enjoy. So that's the material. That's the second philosophy. Then the third one is that everything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth. So most of us will know this as the Mayavad philosophy, this notion of impersonal Brahman, right? This supreme truth, which is like a spiritual energy, like an unlimited ball of energy, which has no form, no qualities, no activity. It's basically like it's basically got no ability for meaningful reciprocation, right? Because when we think of form, when we think of qualities, when we think of variety, it's all got some reciprocal element to it. With Mayavad philosophy, there's actually two types of Mayavad philosophy. Again, this is a technical verse, so we're going to go through the technicals as much as I can share. So the first type of Mayavad philosophy has this notion that there's this impersonal Brahman, right? This spiritual energy, which gets transformed into everything, right? So everything which is illusory, basically, right? So, or everything in creation, let's put it that way. So that could be the universe, the planets, the sun, including us, the jivas, right? So all of us and everything that we see, feel, think is just a transformation of the original impersonal Brahman. That's one type. Then the second type of Mayavad philosophy is that actually there was no transformation of Brahman. It's just Maya. It's just that everything around us, including us in terms of what we perceive as the variety, is just actually caused by our own ignorance. It's caused by illusion. So matter is basically considered illusory in Mayavad philosophy. It's either out of ignorance or because actually it was all one, but it's just been transformed. So what does that philosophy then kind of lead to? It just leads to the idea that, okay, it's all illusion. So we don't need to worry about the body. We don't need to think about other people, the world around us, anything. We don't need to think about anything. All we need to do is concentrate and focus on the impersonal Brahman. And eventually we'll come to a point of, okay, there's two things actually. One is focusing on the impersonal Brahman. And the second is also to develop that detachment from material energy, because it's all illusion. So we need to come away from that understanding that, I have something to do with the material world. So cultivating those two then helps us realize the truth. And then eventually we become one with the impersonal Brahman. So whether it's the impersonal Brahman that's been transformed into something, by focusing on the impersonal Brahman, we become one again, or it's all impersonal Brahman and then there's just illusion everywhere. And by focusing on the impersonal Brahman and detaching ourselves from the illusion, we become one again. So this idea is that it's basically merging into the impersonal, that spiritual form of energy. That's the idea with this. So ultimately, it's only Brahman is real and original, and everything is basically Maya's trick. Whatever we're going through is Maya's trick to make us believe that, oh, Arya Govinda Prabhu is real, you know, he's on the other side of the screen, or Nika Prabhu is real. You know, it's all just illusion. There's no real variety anywhere. We're all one, right? That's the summum bonum of Mayavad philosophy. Then we have the fourth one, which is everything to be an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit. So this comes closer to the idea of there being a spirit soul and then there being matter, right? Which are two distinct things, but they work together, right? So as spirit souls, there's the understanding that we have life symptoms, right? We showcase life symptoms, like we can move, we can act, we can think, we can feel because of us being a spirit soul and therefore displaying these life symptoms or living symptoms. But then because of our karma, because of our desires and our past deeds, we can have influence over certain amounts of dead matter, right? And that influence primarily takes the shape of the body, right? My karma, my desires have enabled me to have influence over my hands, my legs, and this body, basically. That's the imprinted karma. And then by extension, I have additional karma that I can, you know, have a phone, I can have a laptop, I can have my headset, these clothes, and all these things. So extended sort of influence over material energy. But it's really through that influence of the dead matter, of the material energy, that we can interact, that we can speak to each other, that we can express things, we can act out our desires. Right? So that's the idea of this fourth philosophy, that there's the spirit soul, which has influence over matter. And because of that influence, we can basically do what we want, right? We can, within the limitation of what influence we have over the material energy. That's four philosophies that Narada Muni is sharing, right? But we can see that all of them actually have some merit in them, right? When we go through and try to understand, they all have some sort of sense in them. But actually, when we look at them with more detail, then we can understand that they all have some incompleteness to them also, as philosophies in themselves. So if we take the first one, for example, the soul to be an internal principle, right? Yeah, we even in Krishna consciousness, we take the point of we're not this body, we're spirit soul as the foundational principle. But we don't just hold it to that. What this philosophy misses as a philosophy is this idea of the supreme soul and the purpose behind matter, right? The purpose behind the material energy around us. Because if you get bogged down in us being a spirit soul as a philosophy, then you don't care about anything else. You just think about, okay, we're eternal, nothing matters. We don't need to do anything, we don't care about anything. As a foundation of spiritual life, it's important, it's good. But as a philosophy in itself, it doesn't make sense. Then the second we had is material body to be perishable. This misses the fundamental aspect of relationship, right? If we take this philosophy, then what we're saying is that we interact with each other because of chemical reactions, right? Because of material, you know, this body part is interacting with this body part and that's it, there's nothing else. But actually we understand that people don't interact just out of that. People or living entities interact because there's a life symptom, there's consciousness, there's desires, all these things that you can't produce in the lab, right? So if we're just material beings, then you can't explain a lot of these things. We're not just neurons and electrons and so many things. Then the third one, everything exists in the impersonal absolute truth. What this can't explain is how variety can come from nothing. We can see everywhere around us, if it's stale, if it's stagnant, if there's no interaction, there's no movement, then nothing comes out of it. So how can variety come from an impersonal Brahman, which is just a spiritual form of energy? Then we have the fourth one, which is the combination of matter and spirit. So yeah, this comes very close to our idea whereby we're utilizing the material energy. As living beings, as spirit souls, we're utilizing the material energy. But what this as a philosophy misses is this idea that we're not the enjoyers. We're minute enjoyers. There's actually a Supreme Lord who is the supreme enjoyer, who is higher than both matter and the jiva. In all parts of the world, there's many different philosophies that come into existence for many centuries, and even today, philosophers come out of nowhere and impart their own philosophies. And they all have different explanations, and some seem quite valid, some seem quite good. But if we really look at the philosophies, then they might seem convincing initially, but actually there's always things that they're missing. There's always certain details that they're missing, or there's always certain pieces of ignorance in those philosophies. But when we come to this Bhagavata Dharma, or the Bhagavata philosophy of Krishna consciousness, we actually see that there's a complete picture of, and the complete knowledge of reality, right? Which is summed up quite nicely in this idea of Trinity, which is we've got the God, right? Krishna, Ishvara, then we've got the Jiva, and then we've got Prakriti, or the material energy, or the material world. And then it's these three entities and the relationship between them. That's what Bhagavata philosophy really comes down to. It's God, us, and the material world, and the interactions of all three. Whether we read in the Bhagavad Gita, the Bhagavatam, Chaitanya Charitamrita, all three of these aspects and the intertwined relationship between them is very well explained throughout. So then we come back to context of the verse, and we ask the question, well, why is Narada Muni sharing these philosophies? Why did he go through these four philosophies with Yudhishthira Maharaj? Narada Muni, we could say, was anticipating some sort of philosophical reasoning by Yudhishthira Maharaj. Like, my uncles and my aunt, they've gone to the mountains. I'm concerned about them. I need to look after them. They're my responsibility. So what Narada Muni was really doing is trying to showcase already, like, okay, I know you're going to probably think about this, but let me tell you, because of these philosophies, because of these thought processes, you actually don't need to worry, because all the philosophies that you're going to come up with, they all say the same thing, that all the material relationships we have, material relationships, they're all based on illusory energy. They're all based on Maya. So you don't need to be concerned about them. And then also, Prabhupada actually goes a step further in his purport and mentions that, Yudhishthira Maharaj is conscious of the God aspect. And who can check that divine plan of the Supreme Lord? Who can check that divine force? Nobody, right? So what's the point in becoming overwhelmed by that illusory energy? What's the point in becoming overwhelmed in that illusory energy in the form of the affection for his uncles and aunts? And then in the next verse, Narada Muni goes a step further and he's trying to convince Yudhishthira Maharaj to give up that anxiety, which is due to ignorance of the self. Yudhishthira Maharaj wasn't considering that everyone was a spirit soul, that all the movements are controlled by the Supreme Lord. Whatever was happening because of the Supreme Lord's will, and also the desires or the past actions, the karma of the personalities involved. And because of that illusion, because of that lack of consideration of the spirit soul, Yudhishthira Maharaj was thinking that how will Dhritarashtra, how will Gandhari, how will Vidura look after themselves? How will they manage without us? And we see that this happens to all of us, right? A mother is always trying to look after and protect the child. But the child still gets hurt. The child will still prick their finger. The child will still fall over. A doctor's always trying to save the patient. But so many times, patients die on the operation theater. A fireman's always trying to avoid a building burning down. But still, so many times we see buildings and whole forests burning down, right? And even ourselves, right? We're trying to do so many things to look after ourselves. We try to look after our health, our wealth. We try to, when we're crossing the road, we'll be careful that no car's coming. We cross the road safely. When we're cooking, we try and be careful that we don't touch the hot pan or the burning fire. But so many times these things happen and they affect us. Sometimes we might look after our health, every second of the day, but still will fall ill. We might avoid crossing the road. We might always cross the road on zebra crossing when the light is green for us and red for the cars, but still at some point we might get hit. It happens. And in the purport, Sri Prabhupada says that the Lord is known as Bhuta Brit, one who gives protection to all living beings. So it's actually only the Lord that can give protection. But what we can do is we can be instruments in the Lord's plan. How do we be instruments? Well, we go about doing our duty in our current position, but always depending on the Lord for protection. It's not us protecting the child. It's not us protecting those around us, whether it's children, spouse, parents, friends. It's actually the Lord protecting. And as devotees, as followers of the Bhagavata Dharma, right, the highest, the all-encompassing philosophy, the best thing we can do to attract the Lord's protection for ourselves and our loved ones is to engage and fully absorb ourselves in devotional service. And trust Krishna's plan, trust in the protection that Krishna provides. After all, we know that Krishna is described as Bhakta Pranashyati, right? Sorry, Name Bhakta Prayashyati, which is that his devotees never perish. He promises that actually in the Bhagavad Gita in the, I think it's the 9th chapter. He promises that his devotees will never perish. So the idea here is, and it's interesting actually, it's very relevant because Yudhishthira Maharaj, as we know, is a great devotee, is a Pandava, who's a great devotee of the Lord. But even he has become overwhelmed by that affection for his uncle and aunt. And Narada Muni here is reminding him, and through him, Narada Muni is reminding us that yes, we're practicing devotees. We have so many responsibilities, so many people in our care, so many people related to us through blood or through friendship or so many different things. We go about those relationships as a form of duty, trying to be instruments of the Lord's plan, but not the controllers of the plan. It's not us that is actually giving protection. It is Krishna using us to give protection. That's why these four philosophies lead on to this idea that we're not this body, we're a spirit soul, and therefore we don't need to be too overwhelmed by the material affection, by the material energy. So much so that we become completely distraught about things that are happening in our material life, and in this case, with close ones leaving. Right? So summarize, we had four very technical philosophies in the first verse. First philosophy, soul as an eternal principle. Second, material body is perishable. Third, everything to be an inexplicable combination of matter and spirit. Sorry, that was the fourth one. The third one was everything to exist in the impersonal absolute truth. Right, so we talked about the four philosophies, trying to understand them to some degree. I'm sure there's devotees on the call that can share a lot more detail, a lot more depth about these. But then we talked about how the Bhagavata philosophy that we have available to us by the mercy of His Divine Grace, A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, how that actually is a higher philosophy because it includes the philosophies around that are showcased around the world in its complete form to give us that complete picture of reality, right? Which a lot of these other philosophies aren't able to do. And then we talked about how Narada Muni was talking about these philosophies to convince Yudhishthira Maharaj to not become overwhelmed and affected by the illusory energy of the Lord. And always acknowledging that in everything, there's the involvement and the intervention of the Divine Lord. And then we talked about how everything we do and everything that Narada Muni was explaining to Yudhishthira Maharaj was the idea of doing our duty in the mood and understanding that we're just instruments in the Lord's plan. So we have to engage ourselves in full devotional service, but always trust in Krishna's plan, always trust in Krishna's protection. We do the best we can and leave the rest to Krishna. So I'll stop there. Thank you. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Bad ki jai.
Hare Krishna Prabhuji, thank you very much for explaining this very technical topic so nicely, because now we can put things in perspective. When people are talking, we would know which philosophy they are talking of. Bringing out all these four philosophies and the distinctions and what they are lacking, I think that was really good, especially for me in the understanding. Let us move on now to various questions and comments. Are there any questions and comments?
Hare Krishna Prabhu, Dandavat Pranam.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, in this verse, as you said, it's a difficult, very difficult subject, which Narada Muni was explaining. And also in the Bhagavad Gita, Krishna gives different options to the devotees, who are studying, that, you can do this. If you don't want to do this, you can do this. So he gives a lot of options that at least a living entity in a human form of life takes any one of them which is suitable for him for his level of consciousness to take up to spirituality, at least some part, at least, if not the whole. And then if he wants to take the whole, also everything is included in the preachings of the Bhagavad Gita and the Bhagavatam. So is that the purpose of giving all these different options, Prabhu?
Thank you, Prabhu, for the nice deep question. So my understanding of the different processes that are given in the Bhagavad Gita and even the other scriptures, it's more of a progression, right? Because as he said, Krishna doesn't start with, okay, you can do this, but if this is too easy for you, you do this. If that's too easy, you do this. No, he starts the other way around. He goes, this is what you should do. But if you can't do this, then you do this. And if you can't do that, then you do that. So what Krishna has done, he's laid out what the topmost is for us. And then he's going, okay, not everybody can do this. And therefore, based on where you're at, this is what you need to then get to the next step. So he's given us the target, which is, be a pure devotee. That's the target. But he's saying, if you can't be a pure devotee because your consciousness isn't there yet, then do this. But remember that you don't want to stay here. You want to go there. So the idea is that he's given us a progression to go, okay, Bhagavata Dharma is for everyone. Bhagavata philosophy is for everyone. Take up what you can, but know that your target is not where you're at. It's pure devotional service. So let's say you're complete atheist. If you preach to an atheist to go worship Krishna, 100%, 24/7, worship Krishna, chant the holy name, they're not going to take it. So what do? We go, accept that you're not this body, you're a spirit soul. Step one. Then go, okay, you've accepted that now. Now here's the next thing, here's the next thing. Okay, now do some service because that's higher. Okay, now chant Hare Krishna because that's higher. Okay, now chant Hare Krishna 24/7. So Krishna's given us that progression. He's given us the bhakti ladder, or the yoga ladder as we call it. Because it's a ladder, we want to get to the top. We don't want to stay where we are. So hopefully that answers the question, Prabhu.
True. Very nicely explained, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Hare Krishna.
Hare Krishna, are there any other questions or comments? Yeah, I just have a small comment, like how Dhritarashtra doesn't want to leave the palace. Maybe we are like we are the same. We don't want to leave this body. We get too attached to it, and then in spite of falling sick, in spite of having these various fractures, or in spite of having tumors, we still go on looking for ways of staying in this body. So that is the way I understood how Dhritarashtra didn't want to leave the palace. And Vidura is the Paramatma inside us and saying, okay, now all these things are happening to you. At least start worshipping Lord Krishna. So when I first read that, that is the way I understood it.
That's amazing. So I go to Prabhu's eyebrows shoot up as well. So I'm like, yeah. I think next class should be from Kritika Mataji, Prabhu.
No, not from. No, I don't think I'm qualified, but I was just thinking about how to put it in an easy form for me to understand and remember.
Yeah. No, it's interesting because I was thinking this the other day. All the Lord's pastimes are there to teach us something like this, but they're also pastimes. They also exist. So it's nice. Like I can't remember who was mentioning this a couple of days ago, but whatever the Lord does, he never just does one thing. He always does multiple things at once. Whereas we try to do multiple things and we end up doing none of them. We try to multitask, but we can never do any one of the things. We set out to do two, we don't even do one. But the Lord sets out to do, so-called does one, but he does dozens at the same time. So it's, yeah. That's why he's the Supreme Lord and we are jivas.
Any other questions or comments? I understand this is a very hard class today, and maybe devotees in this group will take away these 5 philosophies and mull over them, and maybe there'll be questions coming out in the subsequent classes. So there are no other questions or comments. I see Path Prabhu is here. Hare Krishna Prabhuji, Dandavat Pranam. Prabhuji, is it possible?
Hare Krishna Mataji. Yes, Mataji. Hare Krishna. Yeah. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for your nice class. It is really very informative and very nice class. Today there is no comment, also no question also from my side. And it's very nice class and sober class. Thank you very much, Prabhuji, for our wonderful class. Also, thanks all the devotees who are assembling here for the Bhagavad Katha. So I request all the devotees, please unmute yourself and chant Hare Krishna mantra for glorification of His Grace Braj Govindam Prabhuji. Please join. Hare Krishna, Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare, Hare Rama, Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Vancha kalpa tarurvhyasya, kripa sindhubhya eva cha, patitanam pavanebhyo वैष्णवेभ्यो नमो नमः। श्रील प्रभुपाद की जय। ब्रज गोविंदम प्रभु की जय।
ISKCON
हरि बोल।
Eldoret ki Jai.
Jai.
Hare Krishna.
Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna।
Hare Krishna.